I should have known something was wrong when they drove away without looking back. There I stood at Tulsa International, watching my son's tail lights disappear into the evening traffic, clutching a plane ticket I had no intention of using. At 74, I'd learned a thing or two about people, but I never thought my own blood would leave me stranded like a piece of unwanted luggage. But wait, let me back up and tell you how this whole mess started. Everything was perfect. Or so I thought. There I was, living in my little house in Tulsa for 43 years, thinking I had the most loving family a woman could ask for. My son Michael and his wife Jennifer had been so sweet to me after my Harold passed 2 years ago. They'd come by every Sunday for dinner, help with my yard work, and Jennifer would even bring me those store-bought cookies I pretended to love. But looking back now, I can see the signs clear as day. The way they'd whisper when they thought I wasn't listening. How they started asking about my future plans, and whether I'd considered downsizing. Jennifer began making comments about how dangerous it was for me to live alone at 74. They painted it all with such concern, such love. I was such a fool. The first real warning came on a Tuesday in October. I was watering my petunias when I heard Jennifer's voice drift through the kitchen window. "She's getting more forgetful, Michael. Last week she called me Karen twice." I'd called her Karen because that was Harold's sister's name, and Jennifer reminded me of her something fierce. Both had that pinched look around the eyes when they weren't getting their way. But I kept that observation to myself. "Maybe it's time we started looking into places," Michael replied, his voice carrying that tone he'd used as a boy when he was planning mischief. Places. As if my home of 4 decades was just a temporary stop. They had it all figured out. Things escalated after Thanksgiving. Michael sat me down with this serious look on his face and told me they'd found the perfect solution. A lovely assisted living facility called Sunset Manor. "Mom, you'll have friends your age, activities, and we won't have to worry about you falling or forgetting to take your medicine." The way he said it, like it was already decided. Jennifer chimed in with her fake sweet voice. "We've already put down a deposit, Grandma Rose. The waiting list is so long, but we pulled some strings." They showed me glossy brochures with smiling old folks playing cards and doing watercolor paintings. What they didn't mention was that I'd have to sell my house, the house Harold built with his own 2 hands, to afford it. The monthly fee was $3,500. My Social Security barely covered $1,500. The math wasn't hard to figure. When I hesitated, that's when their true colors started showing. "Mom, you're being selfish," Michael said, his jaw tight. "Do you want us to spend our lives worrying about you? What about our kids' college funds?" College funds. For children who visited me twice a year and called me the old lady when they thought I couldn't hear. The guilt trips came daily after that. Jennifer would call with stories about elderly neighbors who'd fallen and weren't found for days. Michael started leaving real estate flyers on my kitchen counter, properties that sold for way more than expected. I played the part they wanted, the confused, grateful old woman who needed their guidance. Inside, something was crystallizing, hard and sharp as winter ice. 3 weeks before they planned to ship me off to Sunset Manor, I was cleaning out my bedroom closet when I knocked over an old shoebox. Out spilled dozens of letters and documents I'd completely forgotten about. My Harold, bless his soul, had been more clever than I ever knew. Bank statements, property deeds, investment records. Turns out, back in 1987, Harold had quietly purchased 3 rental properties downtown when the oil boom was happening. The rental income had been going into a separate account all these years, one I never paid attention to because Harold handled all the finances. But there it was, black and white. I was worth over $2 million. $2 million. I sat on my bedroom floor, surrounded by papers, and laughed until tears ran down my cheeks. Then I cried until I couldn't cry anymore. That's when everything clicked. Michael and Jennifer didn't want to help me. They wanted to control me. Get me out of my house, into that facility where I'd slowly spend down my assets, and then inherit whatever was left. But they had no idea about Harold's secret nest egg. Nobody did. I played along for 2 more weeks, letting them think I was resigned to their plan. Meanwhile, I contacted Harold's old lawyer, Mr. Peterson, and arranged to meet him. I told Michael and Jennifer I was flying to Dallas to visit my sister Ruth one last time before moving to the facility. They were so eager to get me out of the way, they practically pushed me toward the departure gate. "Have a good trip, Mom," Michael said, barely looking at me as he checked his phone. "We'll pick you up Sunday evening." Jennifer was already walking back to the car. "Don't forget to tell Ruth about Sunset Manor. She might want to look into it too." But here's where it gets ugly, Sugar. When I got to the gate, I realized I'd forgotten my reading glasses in Michael's car. I went back to the pickup area, and that's when I heard them through the cracked window. "Thank God she's finally going along with this," Jennifer was saying, her voice bright with relief. "Once we sell that old house, we can pay off the credit cards and maybe get that boat you wanted." Michael laughed, actually laughed, and said, "She'll burn through her savings at that place in 5 years, then we'll have to put her somewhere cheaper. But at least the house money will tide us over until then." A boat. They were planning to buy a boat with the money from selling Harold's house. I stood there in the airport pickup lane, listening to my son and daughter-in-law divvy up my life like vultures over roadkill. Cars honked around me, people rushed past with their suitcases, but I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. "Should we grab dinner?" Jennifer asked. "Celebrate? Celebrate." That's when something broke inside me. Or maybe something finally healed. Wanting to see what would happen next, subscribe to this channel to get to listen to more of our upcoming exciting stories. Click on the subscribe button now. Thank you. I didn't go to Dallas, of course. I took a taxi straight to Mr. Peterson's office, and honey, did we have ourselves a productive meeting. Harold's old lawyer was sharp as ever, even at 82, and he listened to my story with the kind of quiet attention that told me he'd seen this particular brand of family greed before. By Monday morning, I had done 3 things that would change everything. Transferred the house deed into an irrevocable trust, moved all my assets into protected accounts, and set up a foundation in Harold's name for elderly care advocacy. The house would never be sold. It would become a resource center for seniors dealing with financial abuse. Every month, the rental income from Harold's properties would fund legal aid for older folks whose families were trying to take advantage of them. When Michael and Jennifer came to pick me up from the airport that Sunday, they found me sitting there with the biggest smile on my face. "How was your trip, Mom?" Michael asked, clearly annoyed that I looked so cheerful instead of grateful. "Oh, it was wonderful, sweetheart. I had the most interesting conversations. About family and loyalty, and what people really think when they assume you can't hear them through car windows." The color drained from both their faces. Jennifer started stammering something about traffic and being in a hurry, but I held up my hand. "Now don't you worry about me or that old house anymore. I've made arrangements. The house is staying exactly where it is, in a trust that will turn it into a resource center for seniors. And as for me? Well, I've decided I quite like my independence." I stood up, shouldered my purse, and looked them both in the eye. "I'll be taking a taxi home. You two enjoy that boat you were planning to buy with my house money. Though I suspect your credit card payments are going to be a bit more challenging now." Michael's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Jennifer went pale as milk. "Mom, we never said anything about a boat." "Sugar," I interrupted. "I may be 74, but my hearing works just fine. Drive safe now." I walked away from them in that airport, my back straight and my head high. Behind me, I could hear Jennifer's voice rising in panic, Michael's angry responses. But I didn't look back. Sometimes the people who claim to love you the most are the ones you need to protect yourself from. Michael and Jennifer are still paying off those credit cards. Me, I'm sitting in my beautiful house that Harold built, sipping sweet tea, and helping other seniors make sure their families don't pull the same tricks on them. Sometimes the best revenge is just living well and being smarter than folks think you are. The week after Thanksgiving should have been peaceful. I always loved that quiet time when the turkey leftovers were finally gone and Christmas decorations weren't quite ready to come out yet. Harold used to call it the breathing space. And we'd spend those evenings reading by the fireplace, him with his farming magazines and me with whatever romance novel had caught my fancy. But this year, that breathing space felt more like holding my breath underwater. Michael showed up on a Wednesday evening without calling first. That should have been my second warning sign. My son had always been particular about manners, even as a boy. But there he was on my front porch at 6:30 sharp, briefcase in hand like he was conducting business. "Mom, we need to talk," he said, settling himself at my kitchen table without being invited to sit. "Jennifer's meeting us here in a few minutes. We've got some exciting news." Exciting. The word sat wrong in my mouth like milk gone sour. Jennifer arrived precisely 10 minutes later, her arms full of glossy folders and her smile bright as fresh paint. She'd always been pretty in that carefully maintained way. Blonde hair that came from a bottle, nails that never chipped, clothes that never wrinkled. Harold used to say she looked like she was afraid of getting dirty, and watching her navigate my kitchen in her white pants and heels, I saw what he meant. "Grandma Rose," she chirped, kissing the air near my cheek. You look wonderful. Have you been using that moisturizer I brought you? I hadn't, but I nodded anyway. Pick your battles, Harold always said. Michael cleared his throat, and both Jennifer and I turned our attention to him. He had that serious look on his face, the same expression he'd worn when he told me he was dropping out of pre-med to study business instead. Like he was delivering news that would change everything, and he wasn't entirely sure how I'd take it. Mom, Jennifer and I have been doing some research, and we've found the perfect solution for your situation. My situation. As if living in my own home was some kind of problem that needed solving. What situation is that, honey? I asked, keeping my voice level. Jennifer jumped in before Michael could answer, spreading those glossy folders across my kitchen table like she was dealing cards. We know you've been lonely since Grandpa Harold passed, and we worry about you being here all by yourself. What if you fell? What if something happened and no one found you for days? The brochures were beautiful, I'll give them that. Sunset Manor looked like a luxury resort in the pictures. Smiling elderly folks playing cards in a sunlit room, others painting watercolors by a picture window, a dining room that could have been in a fancy restaurant. Everyone looked so happy, so well cared for. It's an assisted living facility, Michael explained, his voice taking on that patient tone you'd use with a child. The finest one in the state. You'd have your own apartment, but there'd be people around if you needed help. Activities, social events, even a beauty salon. And the food, Jennifer added, her enthusiasm almost convincing. They have a full-time chef. No more cooking for yourself or worrying about groceries. I'd been cooking for myself since I was 12 years old, when my mama got sick and daddy needed help feeding 6 kids. Cooking wasn't a chore for me. It was a conversation with the past, a way of keeping Harold close when I made his favorite cornbread or the apple pie that always made him smile. It sounds lovely, I said carefully, but I'm quite happy here. That's when the real pitch began. Michael leaned forward, his elbows on the table. Mom, you say that now, but what happens when you can't manage the stairs anymore? What about when driving becomes dangerous? What if your memory starts to go? My memory is fine, I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I could see Jennifer making a little note in the margin of one of her brochures. Of course it is, she said sweetly. But prevention is better than crisis management. We've already put down a deposit, Grandma Rose. The waiting list is so long, but we pulled some strings. Already put down a deposit. Without asking me. Without even telling me they were looking. I don't understand, I said, though I was beginning to understand all too well. What kind of deposit? Michael shifted in his chair. Just a small one. $5,000. Fully refundable if you decide it's not right for you. $5,000 wasn't small to most people. But Michael made good money at his accounting firm. Still, I wondered where they'd gotten it so easily, especially with Jennifer's shopping habits and those private school tuitions for Emma and Christopher. The monthly fee is very reasonable, Jennifer continued, flipping to a page in one of the brochures. Only $3,500. That covers everything, your apartment, meals, activities, medical supervision. $3,500 a month. My Social Security check was barely $1,500. They had to know that. How would I pay for something like that? I asked. The look that passed between them was quick, but I caught it, like they'd rehearsed this part. Well, Michael said slowly, you'd need to make some adjustments. Downsize. This house is way too big for one person anyway, and the maintenance costs are only going to get higher. Downsize. Sell the house Harold built with his own hands, board by board, room by room. The house where we'd brought our babies home from the hospital, where we'd celebrated birthdays and anniversaries, where I'd held his hand as he took his last breath in our bedroom upstairs. I see, I said. Jennifer must have heard something in my voice because she reached across the table and patted my hand. I know it seems overwhelming, Grandma Rose. Change is hard at your age. But think about it, no more worrying about repairs or yard work, or whether you remembered to lock all the doors. And you'll make so many new friends. Mrs. Patterson from our neighborhood moved to Sunset Manor last year, and she absolutely loves it. Dolores Patterson had dementia and didn't recognize her own children half the time, but I didn't mention that. When would this happen? I asked. Well, Michael said, consulting his phone, they have an opening the first week of January. We thought that would give you time to get used to the idea and sort through your things. 6 weeks. They wanted to uproot my entire life in 6 weeks. What about my things? My furniture, my pictures, Harold's workshop in the garage. The apartment comes furnished, Jennifer said brightly. Very nice pieces, much newer than what you have here. You could bring some personal items, of course. Photos, maybe a few pieces of jewelry. But really, Grandma Rose, starting fresh might be good for you. Starting fresh. At 74 years old. I looked around my kitchen, at the apple-shaped cookie jar Harold had bought me for our 10th anniversary, at the window over the sink where I'd watched the seasons change for 43 years, at the small dent in the wall where Michael had thrown a baseball when he was 8 and was too afraid to tell us what had happened. I need time to think about this, I said. That's when their masks started to slip. Michael's jaw tightened. Mom, there's not much time. If we don't confirm by Monday, they'll give the spot to someone else. Do you have any idea how hard it was to get you moved up on that waiting list? I didn't ask you to move me up on any waiting list. Because you don't ask for help with anything. Jennifer's voice rose slightly before she caught herself and forced that smile back into place. You're so independent, which we admire, but sometimes you have to let people who love you take care of you. Michael, I said, turning to my son, I've been taking care of myself for 2 years since your father died. I pay my bills, I maintain this house, I drive myself to the grocery store and the doctor. What exactly makes you think I need to be taken care of? He ran his hand through his hair, a nervous gesture he'd had since childhood. It's not about what you need now, Mom. It's about planning ahead. Being responsible. Responsible. Like I was a burden they needed to manage. What about Emma and Christopher? I asked, referring to my grandchildren. Do they know about this plan? Another look passed between Michael and Jennifer, and this one lingered longer. The kids are focused on school right now, Jennifer said carefully. And honestly, Grandma Rose, they're at that age where they're not really interested in spending time with. Well, they have their own lives. Their own lives. Emma was 15, Christopher was 12. At that age, I'd been helping raise my younger siblings and learning to can vegetables for the winter. But these children were too busy with their video games and private lessons to visit their grandmother more than twice a year. Besides, Michael added, this would actually be better for them in the long run. The money from selling this house could go into their college funds. You know how expensive education is these days. There it was. The real reason. So let me understand this correctly, I said, my voice steady despite the anger building in my chest. You want me to sell the house your father built, move into an expensive facility I can't afford, so that the profit can pay for your children's college educations. Mom, you're making it sound so cold, Michael said, but he couldn't meet my eyes. We're trying to do what's best for everyone. You'll be safe and cared for, the kids will have their futures secured, and Jennifer and I won't have to worry about you every single day. What exactly do you worry about? Everything. Jennifer burst out, her composure finally cracking. We worry that you'll fall down those stairs and break your hip. We worry that you'll forget to turn off the stove and burn the house down. We worry that someone will take advantage of you because you're too trusting. We worry that you'll get sick and we won't know because you never call anyone when you need help. I called you when the hot water heater broke last month, I pointed out. After you'd been without hot water for 3 days. Michael said, See, that's exactly what we mean. You suffer in silence instead of asking for help. I'd been without hot water for 3 days because I'd been trying to fix it myself first, the way Harold had taught me. I'd called them when I finally admitted I needed a professional plumber. But apparently self-reliance was now a character flaw. What if I said no? I asked quietly. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. Finally, Michael sighed. Mom, you're being selfish. Do you want us to spend our lives worrying about you? What about Emma and Christopher's futures? What about our peace of mind? Selfish. The word hit me like a slap. You think I'm selfish for wanting to stay in my own home? I think you're not considering how this affects anyone but yourself, he said, and there was an edge to his voice I'd never heard before. Jennifer and I have responsibilities. We have our own mortgage, our own bills, 2 kids to put through college. We can't afford to drop everything every time you need something fixed, or every time we worry about whether you're okay. I never asked you to drop everything. You don't have to ask, Jennifer said, her perfect composure completely gone now. That's the point. We love you, so we worry. We feel responsible for you. And frankly, it's exhausting. Exhausting. Their love for me was exhausting. I sat back in my chair, looking at these 2 people I thought I knew. My son, who used to bring me dandelions he'd picked from the yard and call them beautiful flowers for the most beautiful mama. My daughter-in-law, who used to ask for my recipes and genuinely seemed to enjoy our conversations about books and gardening. When had they become strangers? When had their concern become manipulation? When had their love become obligation? I need you both to leave now, I said quietly. Mom, Michael started. I said I need to think about it, and I can't think with you two sitting here telling me how selfish and exhausting I am. Please go. They gathered up their brochures and folders, Jennifer stuffing them into her designer purse with sharp, irritated movements. Michael lingered at the door. We need an answer by Monday, Mom. I'm not trying to pressure you, but you are pressuring me, I interrupted. That's exactly what you're doing. After they left, I sat in my kitchen as the winter darkness fell outside my windows. The house felt different somehow, like the walls themselves had heard the conversation and were holding their breath. I walked through the rooms Harold and I had shared for so many years, touching the furniture we'd bought piece by piece when we were young and money was tight, looking at the photographs that chronicled our life together. In the living room, I stopped in front of the picture window where Harold used to stand every morning with his coffee, watching the sunrise over the neighborhood he'd helped build. What do you think, sweetheart? I whispered to the empty room. What would you do? But I already knew what Harold would say. He'd say the same thing he always said when someone tried to push us around. Rose, darling, never let anyone make you feel small in your own house. That night, I lay in our bed, my bed now, and stared at the ceiling. Sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Jennifer's voice. It's exhausting. I heard Michael's. You're being selfish. But underneath their words, I heard something else. Something that chilled me more than the December wind rattling my windows. I heard the sound of my life being divided up like pieces of a pie, with everyone getting a slice except me. The manipulation had begun in earnest, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. I might be 74 years old, but I wasn't anyone's burden. And I sure as hell wasn't going down without a fight. The days after Michael and Jennifer's ultimatum crawled by like wounded animals. Every morning I woke up thinking maybe I'd dreamed the whole thing, that my son hadn't really called me selfish, that my daughter-in-law hadn't really said loving me was exhausting. But then I'd see those glossy Sunset Manor brochures still sitting on my kitchen counter where they'd left them, and reality would crash back down like a bucket of ice water. 3 weeks. They'd given me 3 weeks to come to my senses and agree to their plan. 3 weeks to pack up 43 years of memories and hand over the keys to the house Harold built with his own hands. I tried to go about my normal routine. I watered my plants, watched my morning shows, made myself simple meals that I barely tasted. But the house felt different now, like it was holding its breath. Every creak of the floorboards, every rattle of the windows in the December wind seemed to whisper the same question. How much longer? It was on a Tuesday morning, exactly 3 weeks before my supposed move-in date at Sunset Manor, that everything changed. I'd been putting off cleaning out the bedroom closet for months. Harold's clothes still hung there, his work shirts, his Sunday suit, that old cardigan with the hole in the elbow that he refused to let me throw away. I'd managed to donate some things to the church in the weeks after the funeral, but the closet still held too many memories, too many pieces of the man I'd loved for 51 years. But that morning, facing the prospect of strangers pawing through my belongings, deciding what was worth keeping and what should be discarded, I knew I had to do it myself. At least this way, I could say goodbye properly. I started with the easy things. Old shoes that hadn't been worn in years, moth-eaten sweaters, ties that had gone out of style decades ago. Harold had never been a pack rat, but he'd been sentimental about the oddest things. I found the shirt he'd worn on our first date, carefully preserved in tissue paper. The watch his father had given him when he graduated high school, still ticking faithfully after all these years. I was reaching for a box on the top shelf when my elbow knocked against something else. An old shoebox tumbled down, hitting my shoulder before crashing to the floor. The lid popped off, and papers scattered everywhere like startled birds. Damn it, Harold, I muttered, even though I was the clumsy one. Old habits. I knelt down to gather up the mess, expecting to find old receipts or maybe some of Harold's farming magazines. Instead, my hands closed around bank statements, property deeds, and letters I'd completely forgotten about. The first document I picked up made my heart skip. It was a deed dated 1987 for a property on 4th Street downtown. Harold's signature was at the bottom, along with mine, though I had no memory of signing it. Then another deed. And another. 3 properties total, all purchased during that crazy time in the late 80s when oil money was flowing through Oklahoma like water through a broken dam. I remembered Harold being excited about some investment opportunity. But he'd handled all our finances back then. I'd trusted him completely, signed whatever papers he put in front of me, and never asked too many questions. My hands were shaking as I picked up the bank statements. An account I'd never heard of, at a bank I'd never set foot in. The statements went back decades, showing regular deposits every month. Rental income. I spread the papers out on the bedroom floor, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The properties were all in good areas of downtown Tulsa, areas that had only gotten more valuable over the years as the city revitalized its core. The rental income had been steady, growing slowly but consistently as rents increased. And the bank balance. I had to read it 3 times before it sank in. $2,347,612.38. I sat back on my heels, the papers fluttering in my trembling hands. $2 million. I was a millionaire, and I hadn't even known it. There was a letter in Harold's handwriting, dated just a month before he died. "My darling Rose," it began, and I could hear his voice as clearly as if he were sitting beside me. "If you're reading this, then I'm gone and you're cleaning out that closet I always meant to organize. I'm sorry for keeping this from you, sweetheart, but I wanted it to be a surprise for your golden years. Something to make sure you'd never have to worry about money or depend on anyone else to take care of you. If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting impactful daily stories like this? We would be most grateful if you can do that to help boost this video to reach everyone. Thank you. The properties are all in good condition, and I've been working with a management company called Peterson Property Services to handle the day-to-day operations. They take a percentage, but it's worth it to keep you from having to deal with tenants and repairs. The contact information is in this box somewhere, probably scattered all over the floor now, knowing how you are with boxes on high shelves. I know you never paid much attention to our finances, and that's my fault for not including you more. But I need you to know that you're set for life, Rose. More than set. You can live exactly how you want to live, in the house we built together, for as long as you want to stay there. No one can force you to do anything you don't want to do. I love you more than all the stars in the Oklahoma sky. Take care of yourself, and don't let anybody tell you what you should or shouldn't do with your life. Your devoted husband, Harold. P.S. I hid this box way up high because I knew you'd only find it when you were really cleaning, probably after I was gone. I also knew you'd knock it over and make a mess. Some things never change, my darling. I pressed the letter to my chest and sobbed. Great, heaving sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than my lungs, deeper than my heart. Harold had been protecting me even from the grave, making sure I'd have choices, making sure I'd never be at anyone's mercy. When the tears finally stopped, I looked around at the papers spread across my bedroom floor with new eyes. This wasn't just money, this was freedom. This was power. This was the ability to tell Michael and Jennifer exactly what they could do with their guilt trips and their manipulation. I found the contact information for Peterson Property Services buried in an envelope with more bank statements. The company was still active, still managing the properties, still depositing rent into that account I'd never known existed. According to the most recent statement, the monthly income was over $8,000. $8,000 a month. More than double what Michael and Jennifer claimed it would cost to keep me at Sunset Manor. I sat there on the floor of my bedroom, surrounded by the evidence of Harold's love and foresight, and felt something I hadn't experienced in 2 years. Not since Harold died, not since I'd started thinking of myself as a burden, as someone who needed to be managed and controlled. I felt powerful. But more than that, I felt angry. White-hot, righteous anger that started in my stomach and spread through my whole body like wildfire. Michael and Jennifer hadn't wanted to help me. They'd wanted to control me, get me out of my house, into that facility where I'd slowly spend down what they thought were my limited assets. And then what? Put me somewhere cheaper when the money ran out? Let the state take care of me while they enjoyed the proceeds from selling Harold's house? And Emma and Christopher, my grandchildren who were supposedly too busy with their own lives to visit their grandmother. Their college funds would benefit nicely from liquidating everything I owned. I thought about every conversation we'd had over the past few weeks. Every time Michael had mentioned being responsible and planning ahead. Every time Jennifer had talked about what's best for everyone and how exhausting it was to worry about me. They'd been planning this for months, maybe longer. Probably since Harold's funeral, when they'd stood in this very house, looking around at the furniture and the pictures and the life we'd built, and started calculating its value. The worst part was how they'd made me feel like I was the problem. Like my desire to stay in my own home was selfish. Like my independence was a burden they shouldn't have to bear. I gathered up all the papers, every bank statement and deed and letter, and carried them downstairs to the kitchen table. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I called in sick to my volunteer work at the church and spent the entire day on the phone. First, I called Peterson Property Services and talked to a very nice young man named David, who confirmed everything the papers had told me. The properties were in excellent condition, the tenants were reliable, and the rental income was actually higher now than what the last statement showed. David had been wondering when I'd contact them, he said. They'd been sending letters to Harold for 2 years, but nobody had ever responded. We were starting to worry that something had happened to the property owners, David said. We have a fiduciary responsibility to maintain contact. Well, you're in contact now, I said. And I'd like to schedule a meeting to go over everything. Next, I called the bank and confirmed that yes, the account was real, and yes, I was the sole beneficiary now that Harold was gone. The balance was actually higher than the last statement I'd found, almost $2.5 million with accumulated interest. Then I called Harold's old lawyer, Mr. Peterson, no relation to the property management company, and made an appointment for the following week. Mr. Peterson had handled Harold's will and had always been straight with us about legal matters. If anyone could help me understand my options, it would be him. Finally, I called the one person I knew I could trust completely, my sister Ruth in Dallas. Rose! Ruth's voice was sharp with concern. What's wrong? You never call during the day. Ruthie, I said, using the nickname I'd called her since we were children, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Of course, honey. What is it? If you had children who wanted to put you in a nursing home so they could sell your house and use the money for their own kids' college funds, what would you do? The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought we'd been disconnected. Rose Ellen Morrison, Ruth finally said, her voice deadly quiet. Please tell me you're talking about a hypothetical situation. I told her everything. About Michael and Jennifer's plan, about their ultimatum, about how they'd made me feel selfish and burdensome for wanting to stay in my own home. I told her about the guilt trips and the manipulation, and the way they'd talked about me like I was a problem to be solved. And then I told her about the shoebox. Ruth was quiet for a long time after I finished. When she finally spoke, her voice was tight with anger. Those greedy little vultures, she said. Rose, honey, they were planning to steal your life right out from under you. I know, I said. And the worst part is they almost succeeded. If I hadn't knocked over that box. But you did knock it over. Harold made sure you'd find it when you needed it most. Ruth paused. What are you going to do? I looked around my kitchen, at Harold's coffee mug still sitting by the sink, at the calendar on the wall where I'd marked the days until my supposed move to Sunset Manor, at the brochures Michael and Jennifer had left behind like calling cards from hell. I'm going to remind them exactly who they're dealing with, I said. They think I'm just a helpless old lady they can push around. They have no idea what's coming. Good, Ruth said fiercely. Give them hell, sister. Harold would be proud. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen as the winter sun set outside my windows, casting long shadows across the papers spread on my table. $2 million. 3 rental properties. A monthly income that would let me live comfortably for the rest of my life without depending on anyone. But more than the money, Harold had given me something even more valuable. The power to choose. The power to say no. The power to tell Michael and Jennifer exactly what I thought of their manipulative, greedy plan. They thought they had me cornered, helpless, dependent on their generosity and their concern. They thought I had no options except to go along with their scheme. They had no idea about Harold's secret nest egg. No idea that their helpless old mother was actually wealthier than they'd ever dreamed of being. But they were about to find out. I looked at the calendar on my wall at the date circled in red. The day I was supposed to move into Sunset Manor. 2.5 weeks away. Let them count down the days. Let them make their plans and congratulate themselves on how cleverly they'd manipulated the situation. Because while they were patting themselves on the back, I was going to be planning something they'd never see coming. The next 2 weeks were the hardest acting performance of my life. Every morning, I had to wake up and pretend to be the helpless, defeated old woman Michael and Jennifer expected me to be. I had to sit at my kitchen table with those Sunset Manor brochures, sighing wistfully and making little notes in the margins about which activities I might enjoy. I had to call Jennifer and ask nervous questions about what I should pack, how much I could bring, whether they thought I'd be happy there. Oh, Grandma Rose, she'd coo into the phone. You're going to love it. And think how much easier it'll be for all of us when you're somewhere safe. Safe. The word made my skin crawl now, but I forced enthusiasm into my voice. You're right, dear. I'm starting to see that this really is for the best. Meanwhile, I was having daily phone calls with David at Peterson Property Services, going over tenant agreements and maintenance schedules. I met with Mr. Peterson, Harold's lawyer, and spent 3 hours in his office understanding exactly what my financial situation looked like. I opened new bank accounts and had my mail redirected to a post office box so Michael and Jennifer wouldn't accidentally discover any paperwork. Most importantly, I planned my trip to Dallas. Ruth was in on it, of course. My sister had always been the smarter one, the one who could see through people's lies like they were written on glass. When I called to confirm my visit, she played her part perfectly. "Oh, Rose, I'm so excited you're coming," she said loudly enough for Jennifer to hear. I'd put the call on speaker while Jennifer was helping me organize my jewelry box. "It'll be so nice to spend time together before you move to that lovely facility." Jennifer beamed at me from across the room, probably thinking about how smoothly everything was going. But Ruth's real message came through in the things she didn't say, the emphasis she put on certain words. She was telling me she understood exactly what kind of game we were playing, and she was ready to help me win it. The hardest part was watching Michael and Jennifer's behavior during those 2 weeks. Now that they thought I'd capitulated, their mask of concern slipped more and more each day. Michael started talking about necessary repairs he'd need to make to the house before putting it on the market. Jennifer began making comments about which of my furniture pieces might be worth keeping and which were too outdated to bother with. They brought Emma and Christopher by one evening, ostensibly to say goodbye to Grandma, but I caught them measuring my living room and discussing whether the hardwood floors would need refinishing. Emma, my 15-year-old granddaughter who used to beg me to teach her how to make my famous chocolate chip cookies, barely looked up from her phone the entire visit. "Bye, Grandma," she said when they were leaving, her voice flat and disinterested. "Hope you like your new place." Christopher, who was 12 and used to love hearing Harold's stories about farming, spent the evening asking his parents when they could leave. "This house smells weird," he complained. "Like old people. My own grandchildren. Talking about the house their grandfather built, like it was something distasteful they couldn't wait to be rid of." But the worst moment came 3 days before my supposed trip to Dallas. I was in the kitchen making coffee when I heard Michael and Jennifer talking in the living room. They thought I couldn't hear them over the coffee maker, but my hearing has always been sharp. "I called the realtor," Michael was saying. "She thinks we can list it for $350,000, maybe more if we do some cosmetic work." "That's perfect," Jennifer replied. "After we pay off the credit cards and get that boat, we'll still have plenty left for Emma's car and Christopher's baseball camp. And the vacation fund," Michael added. "God knows we deserve a real vacation after dealing with all this." All this? Meaning me. Meaning the inconvenience of having a mother who wanted to live in her own home. I gripped the coffee pot handle, so hard I thought it might break. They were already spending the money from selling my house, already planning their rewards for getting rid of the burden of caring about me. That's when I knew I had to hear it all. I had to know exactly how deep their betrayal went. So on Friday morning, when Michael picked me up to drive me to the airport, I made sure to leave my reading glasses in his car. Not by accident, by design. The ride to Tulsa International was 45 minutes of the most painful small talk of my life. Michael kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror like he was checking to make sure I wasn't going to change my mind at the last minute. "You have Ruth's address?" he asked for the 3rd time. "Yes, dear." "And you remember your flight comes back Sunday evening?" "Yes, dear." "We'll pick you up at baggage claim. Terminal B, right?" "Right." Jennifer had stayed home, claiming she had errands to run, but I suspected she just couldn't bear to fake concern for one more car ride. That should have been my first clue about what I was going to overhear later. At the airport, Michael walked me as far as the security checkpoint, carrying my small overnight bag like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "Have a good trip, Mom," he said, giving me a quick, awkward hug. "We'll pick you up Sunday evening." He was already turning away before I'd even gotten in the security line. Couldn't wait to get away from me, to get back to his life without the inconvenience of a mother who needed things. But I didn't go through security. Instead, I waited until Michael disappeared into the crowd, then made my way to the departure gate for my supposed flight to Dallas. I sat there for 20 minutes, watching other families say their goodbyes, seeing real tears and genuine affection, and thinking about how different my situation was. That's when I realized I'd forgotten my reading glasses. The walk back to the pickup area took me through the airport's main corridor, past shops and restaurants and hundreds of travelers heading to destinations I'd never see. At 74, this was only the third time I'd been in an airport in my entire life. The first was our honeymoon trip to Colorado in 1972. The second was Harold's funeral, when Ruth flew in from Dallas to be with me. Now here I was, supposedly heading off to my last free weekend before being warehoused in an expensive facility, and nobody in my family cared enough to even pretend to be sad about it. I found Michael's blue Honda in the pickup lane exactly where he'd dropped me off. The windows were cracked open despite the December cold. Michael had always run hot, even as a child. I could hear voices inside before I even got close. "Thank God she's finally going along with this," Jennifer was saying, her voice bright with relief. I was starting to think we'd have to get her declared incompetent or something. My blood turned to ice water in my veins. Incompetent. They'd actually considered having me declared mentally unfit. "It never would have come to that," Michael replied, but there was something in his tone that suggested it wasn't entirely off the table. "She's not that far gone yet." "Yet. Still," Jennifer continued, "I'm so glad we don't have to fight her anymore. Once we sell that old house, we can pay off the credit cards and maybe get that boat you wanted. The Yamaha with the fishing package." A boat. They were planning to buy a boat with the money from selling Harold's house. Michael laughed, actually laughed, and the sound was like a knife twisting in my chest. "She'll burn through her savings at that place in 5 years, then we'll have to put her somewhere cheaper. But at least the house money will tide us over until then." 5 years. They were giving me 5 years before moving me to some bargain basement nursing home where I'd die alone and forgotten. "Do you think she suspects anything?" Jennifer asked. "Are you kidding? She's so grateful we're taking care of her. She can't see past her own neediness. Besides, what choice does she have? She's got no money, no real options. We're doing her a favor, and deep down she knows it. No money. No options. If only they knew." "I just can't wait to get that house on the market," Jennifer said. "The realtor thinks we can close by March if we price it right. Spring's the best time to sell. And then we're free," Michael added. "No more Sunday dinners, no more emergency calls about broken water heaters. No more pretending to care about her boring stories about Dad and the old days. Pretending to care. About Harold. About our life together. About me. The kids will be relieved too," Jennifer said. "Emma's been complaining about having to visit the old lady for months. And Christopher just sits there like he's being tortured. The old lady. That's what my grandchildren called me when they thought I couldn't hear." "Well, now they won't have to," Michael said. "We can visit her at Sunset Manor on holidays, and the rest of the time we can just live our lives." "God, I feel like I can breathe again," Jennifer sighed. "These past few months, worrying about what she might do, whether she'd fight us on this, it's been such a nightmare." A nightmare. Being concerned about their mother and grandmother was a nightmare. "At least we know she'll be taken care of," Michael said, but even he didn't sound like he believed it. "And honestly, she'll probably be happier with people her own age. She's been getting more and more isolated since Dad died." Isolated. Because they'd stopped visiting except when they wanted something. Because they'd made it clear that my stories about Harold and our life together were boring. Because they treated every phone call like an interruption, every request for help like an imposition. "Do you think she'll last 5 years?" Jennifer asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. The question hung in the air like poison gas. "I don't know," Michael said finally. "She's been pretty depressed since Dad died. Maybe being around other people will help, but honestly, I think she's been holding on mostly out of stubbornness. Once she's not in that house anymore, once she doesn't have that connection to Dad." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. They were counting on me dying. Maybe not hoping for it exactly, but they'd clearly considered the possibility that removing me from everything I loved, everyone I'd ever known, might just solve their problem permanently. "We should probably get going," Jennifer said. "I want to stop by the furniture store and look at those dining room sets. If we're going to be entertaining more once we have the extra money." I backed away from the car, my legs shaking so badly I could barely stand. The world seemed to tilt sideways, and for a moment I thought I might collapse right there in the airport pickup lane. My own son. My own daughter-in-law. They weren't just planning to steal my house and my independence, they were planning to destroy me. They wanted me gone, out of their lives, and if moving me to Sunset Manor hastened my death, well, that would just be convenient for everyone. I made it to a bench inside the terminal before my knees gave out completely. Travelers rushed past me, focused on their own destinations, their own lives, their own families. None of them noticed the elderly woman sitting alone, crying quiet tears for the family she thought she'd had. For 51 years, I'd believed that blood was thicker than water. That family meant something. That the love Harold and I had poured into Michael, the grandchildren we'd adored, would create bonds that couldn't be broken. But sitting there in that airport, listening to the echo of their laughter as they planned my demise, I realized I'd been living in a fairy tale. The people I'd loved most in the world saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to overcome, a problem to solve, a burden to dispose of as quickly and cheaply as possible. Well, they were about to learn that this particular burden had teeth. I wiped my tears, straightened my shoulders, and walked to the taxi stand. I had a lawyer to see, papers to sign, and a future to secure. And Michael and Jennifer? They were about to discover that underestimating a 74-year-old woman from Oklahoma was the biggest mistake they'd ever made. I didn't go to Dallas, of course. The taxi driver who picked me up at the airport was a young man named Carlos with kind eyes and a gentle manner. When he asked where I was headed, I almost laughed at the irony of my answer. Downtown, please. To the law offices of Peterson and Associates. Carlos glanced at me in the rearview mirror, probably wondering what a 74-year-old woman with an overnight bag was doing heading to a lawyer's office on a Friday afternoon. But he was polite enough not to ask questions, and I was grateful for the silence. I needed time to think, to plan, to channel the rage I felt into something productive. Mr. Peterson, William Peterson, Harold's old lawyer, had been practicing law in Tulsa for over 40 years. He'd handled our wills, our property purchases, and had been the one to walk me through the legal maze after Harold's death. More importantly, he was one of the few people left who remembered Harold as the sharp, forward-thinking man he'd been, not just the kindly farmer everyone else saw. His office was in an old brick building downtown, the kind of place that had survived urban renewal and oil busts, and everything else Tulsa had thrown at it over the decades. The receptionist, a woman about my age named Margaret, recognized me immediately. "Mrs. Morrison, how lovely to see you. Are you here about Harold's estate?" In a manner of speaking, I said. "I need to see William as soon as possible. It's quite urgent." Margaret must have heard something in my voice because she didn't ask any more questions. She just picked up the phone and had a brief, quiet conversation before hanging up and smiling at me. "He'll see you right now, dear. Go on back to his office." William Peterson had aged well. His hair was completely silver now, and he moved more slowly than he had 2 years ago, but his eyes were still sharp as a hawk's. He stood up from behind his massive oak desk when I entered, extending his hand with genuine warmth. "Rose, what a pleasant surprise. Margaret said it was urgent." I settled into the leather chair across from his desk, the same chair I'd sat in when Harold and I had drawn up our wills 20 years ago. But this time, I wasn't the nervous wife letting her husband handle all the important decisions. This time, I was here on my own terms. "William," I said, pulling the shoebox papers from my overnight bag, "I need your help stopping my son from stealing my life." His eyebrows shot up, but he didn't interrupt as I laid out the entire story. Michael and Jennifer's manipulation, their plan to force me into Sunset Manor, their schemes to sell my house and use the proceeds for their own benefit. I told him about the airport conversation, about their casual discussion of my probable death, about how they'd been pretending to care while planning to profit from my misery. And then I showed him Harold's secret legacy. William examined each document carefully, his expression growing more serious with each bank statement and property deed. When he finally looked up, his face was grim. "Rose, you realize what they were trying to do amounts to financial elder abuse? If they'd succeeded in getting you declared incompetent, they could have controlled all your assets. Even without that, pressuring you to sell your home under false pretenses. Can you stop them?" I asked. "Honey," he said, leaning back in his chair with the first smile I'd seen from him, "I can do much better than that. I can make sure they never get the chance to try this with anyone else." We worked until well past 6 o'clock that Friday evening. William called in favors, contacted judges, and set legal wheels in motion that I didn't fully understand but absolutely trusted. By the time we finished, I had done 3 things that would change everything. First, we transferred the deed to my house into an irrevocable trust. Not just any trust. One specifically designed to protect elderly homeowners from being forced out by family members. The house would remain mine to live in for the rest of my life, but it could never be sold. When I died, it would become a resource center for seniors dealing with financial abuse, staffed by social workers and lawyers who understood exactly what families like Michael and Jennifer were capable of. Second, we moved all my assets, the secret accounts, the rental properties, everything, into protected trusts that no one could touch. The monthly income would continue to flow to me, more than enough to live comfortably, but the principal was locked away from anyone who might try to manipulate or control me. Third, and most satisfying, we established the Harold Morrison Foundation for Elderly Care Advocacy. The foundation would use the income from Harold's rental properties to provide legal aid, financial counseling, and support services for older adults whose families were trying to take advantage of them. William knew 3 other lawyers who specialized in elder law, and by Monday morning, they'd have funding to take on cases like mine pro bono. There's one more thing, William said as we wrapped up. I'm going to recommend that we file a report with Adult Protective Services about what Michael and Jennifer attempted to do. Even though they didn't succeed, their behavior fits the pattern of financial elder abuse, and there should be a record in case they try this with someone else. The thought of my son's name being associated with elder abuse should have made me sad. Instead, I felt nothing but grim satisfaction. Actions had consequences, and it was time Michael learned that. I spent Saturday at Ruth's house. I really did go to Dallas, just a day later than planned and by car instead of plane. My sister took one look at my face when I walked through her door, and immediately poured us both a generous glass of wine. "Well," she asked, "how did it go?" I told her everything, and with each detail, Ruth's smile grew wider. "Harold would be so proud of you," she said when I finished. "You turned their own greed against them." "The best part," I said, "is they have no idea what's coming. They think I'm still the helpless old woman they can push around." Ruth raised her glass in a toast. "Here's to sisterhood, and to showing the younger generation that we didn't get this old by being stupid." Sunday evening, I took a taxi back to Tulsa International and positioned myself at baggage claim in Terminal B, exactly where I was supposed to be. I'd called Michael Saturday morning to confirm my flight details, playing the part of the dutiful mother one last time. "Looking forward to being picked up tomorrow evening," I'd said sweetly. "I have so much to tell you about my trip." I sat in the baggage claim area with my small overnight bag, watching other passengers reunite with their families. Real families who hugged each other and asked genuine questions about their trips and seemed genuinely happy to be together. I wondered if Michael and Jennifer had spent the weekend celebrating, maybe shopping for that boat they wanted to buy with my house money. Maybe they'd already called the realtor, started planning the renovations that would maximize their profit. They arrived exactly on time. Michael was always punctual when it served his purposes. I saw them before they saw me, and the sight of them together made my stomach turn. Jennifer was dressed in a new outfit I didn't recognize, probably bought with money they'd borrowed against their expected windfall. Michael looked relaxed and pleased with himself, like a man whose problems were finally solved. They found me sitting in the same plastic chair where I'd waited for them 2 years ago when Ruth flew in for Harold's funeral. But this time, instead of the grief-stricken widow they'd seen then, they found me sitting there with the biggest smile on my face. "How was your trip, Mom?" Michael asked, and I could hear the annoyance in his voice. He'd expected me to look sad, maybe even broken by the reality of saying goodbye to Ruth before entering Sunset Manor. Instead, I looked happier than I had in months. "Oh, it was wonderful, sweetheart," I said, standing up and shouldering my purse. "I had the most interesting conversations, about family and loyalty and what people really think when they assume you can't hear them through car windows." The color drained from both their faces like someone had pulled a plug. Jennifer's mouth opened and closed without any sound coming out. Michael's eyes went wide, and I saw the exact moment when he realized what I was saying. "Mom, I don't know what you think you heard," he started, but I held up my hand. "Oh, I know exactly what I heard," I said pleasantly. "Jennifer talking about how grateful she was that I was finally going along with this. You laughing about how I'd burn through my savings in 5 years, and then you'd have to put me somewhere cheaper. Both of you planning to buy a boat with the money from selling my house." Jennifer started stammering something about misunderstanding and taking things out of context, but I wasn't finished. "I also heard you discussing whether I'd last 5 years, and how my death would be convenient for everyone. I heard you call me the old lady, and talk about how visiting me was a nightmare you couldn't wait to end." By now, other passengers were starting to stare, but I didn't care. I'd been silent for too long, letting them manipulate and control me while pretending it was love. "Now don't you worry about me or that old house anymore," I continued, my voice getting stronger with each word. I've made arrangements. The house is staying exactly where it is, in a trust that will turn it into a resource center for seniors whose families are trying to take advantage of them. Seems there's quite a need for that sort of thing. Michael's face was gray now. Mom, you can't just. Oh, but I can, I interrupted. And I have. The deed's been transferred, the trust is irrevocable, and there's not a damn thing you can do about it. That house will never be sold, Michael. Not ever. Jennifer found her voice at last. But Grandma Rose, what about Sunset Manor? What about the deposit we put down? I smiled at her, the same sweet smile I'd been giving her for years while pretending to like her store-bought cookies. Well, dear, I've decided I quite like my independence. Turns out I'm not nearly as helpless as you both thought. In fact, I'm financially quite comfortable, thanks to some investments your father made that you didn't know about. The look of confusion on their faces was almost comical. They'd been so sure they knew everything about my situation, so confident in their assessment of my vulnerability. And as for me, I continued, I'll be staying right where I am in the house Harold built for as long as I want to stay there. I'll be taking a taxi home tonight, so don't worry about driving me. I started walking toward the taxi stand, then turned back for one final comment. Oh, and you too enjoy that boat you were planning to buy with my house money. Though I suspect your credit card payments are going to be a bit more challenging now that you won't have my estate to look forward to. Michael finally found his voice. Mom, wait. We need to talk about this. You can't just. Actually, I can, I said firmly. I'm 74 years old, Michael, not 74 months. I've been making my own decisions since before you were born, and I'm certainly capable of making them now. I looked at both of them one last time, these people I'd loved and trusted and believed loved me in return. If you'd like to have a relationship with me based on actual love and respect rather than what you think you can get from me, you know where to find me. But if you're just interested in my house or my money or when I might die, then we have nothing more to say to each other. I walked away from them in that airport, my back straight and my head high. Behind me, I could hear Jennifer's voice rising in panic, Michael's angry responses, but I didn't look back. The taxi driver who took me home was different from Carlos, an older man named Frank who'd been driving in Tulsa for 30 years. He glanced at me in the rearview mirror as we pulled away from the airport. Good trip, he asked. I thought about the question. Had it been a good trip? I'd discovered that my son and daughter-in-law saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to their financial plans. I'd learned that my grandchildren thought of me as the old lady they were forced to visit. I'd had to face the reality that the people I loved most in the world would be relieved when I died. But I'd also discovered that I was stronger than I'd known, that I had options I'd never dreamed of, that Harold's love had protected me even from the grave, and that I had the power to protect other people facing the same betrayal I'd endured. Yes, I told Frank, watching the lights of Tulsa roll past my window. It was a very good trip indeed. When we pulled up to my house in my irrevocable trust that would never be sold, I sat for a moment looking at the front porch where Harold and I had spent so many evenings, the windows that glowed warm and welcoming in the darkness. Tomorrow, I'd start the next chapter of my life. I'd begin working with the foundation, helping other seniors who were facing what I'd faced. I'd learn more about the rental properties Harold had left me, and maybe even visit them for the first time. I'd call Ruth and Emma and Christopher. Yes, even Emma and Christopher. And see if there was any relationship worth salvaging there, or if they were as lost to greed as their parents. But tonight, I was just going to sit in the house Harold built, with the security of knowing that no one could ever force me to leave it, and remember what it felt like to be underestimated. Michael and Jennifer had thought they were dealing with a helpless old woman who had no choices and no power. They'd learned tonight that they were wrong on both counts. And that, honey, was the sweetest revenge of all. Thank you for watching this video. Subscribe, like and share this video to continue listening to this type of story daily, and also to appreciate this community too. I would like to hear your wonderful opinion about this story. Please comment below.